Buenas tardes, sean bienvenidos a estos webinars de Draft Consultores. En esta ocasión este es un webinar bien especial y hace unos momentos decía que era como la Torre de Babel, porque en esta grabación vamos a, no avisamos que el evento era en inglés, no lo avisamos en español. Lo cierto es que independientemente de sus habilidades, lo que vamos a hacer es lo siguiente. Ustedes pueden usar la herramienta junto a la manita que está en el centro del Meet. Abajo está el CC de Closed Caption. Entonces, si le dan Closed Caption, lo ponen en inglés. Y entonces van a poder por lo menos ver la transcripción en inglés de lo que nuestro invitado mencionando. Él entiende perfectamente el español, pero como no ha podido decir Parangaricutirimícuaro bien, entonces prefiere no hablarlo el español todavía, pero él va a entender perfecto. Por eso esto es la Torre de Babel el día de hoy. Adicionalmente, Marlene Sánchez, si puedes poner tu manita, Marlene, ella es del equipo de Draft y ella, a quien se le atore alguna parte, le pueden poner en el chat, oye, no entendí esto que me están diciendo, y o Marlene lo responde directamente o interrumpe un segundo a John para que le dé una respuesta. Esta sería la mecánica del día de hoy. ¿Están todos de acuerdo? ¿Les parece bien? ¿Alguna duda? Bueno, pues entonces bueno, esto lo voy a hacer en español, después me voy a switchar a mi British English. No te rías, John. Voy a presentarles a John Moravec. A John yo lo conocí, yo creo que hace unos 12 años, hace ya un montón de tiempo, en la Flaxo, en México, junto con Cristóbal Cobo, y de México estaba Alejandro Pisante, y bueno, fue un evento con gente de muy alto nivel. Y ahí es cuando empezamos a ver estas cuestiones del aprendizaje invisible, etcétera. John venía por parte de la Universidad de Minnesota en aquel entonces, y a partir de entonces, John ha hecho muchísimas cosas. Ha creado conceptos como la Nomad Society, una combinación entre knowledge, conocimiento, y nómada. O sea, somos nómadas digitales, el sentido de la adaptación al medio. También él impulsó el Manifiesto 15, que es otro gran paradigma de los tiempos actuales. Él está a cargo de la organización Education Futures y es un hombre que es muy conocido en el medio y que nosotros en Draft estamos muy orgullosos de contar con él y poder platicar, porque algo que platicamos John y yo el día de hoy es que sentimos que estamos en un momento muy importante de la educación, particularmente la educación formal, porque hay muchas tecnologías disruptivas que están amenazando seriamente y que no están pidiendo permiso. Entonces, vamos a hablar de esto. John, nice to meeting you. We are very, very pleased to having you in this draft webinar. And I introduced you in Spanish, but this is your time to start your presentation, and after John's presentation, we will have a time for discussion, for having questions from you, from our part, and the idea is to start building knowledge between everyone. So, John, you are very welcome, and the place is yours.
No, muchísimas gracias, Luis. Hola a todos. Entonces voy a hablar en inglés because it's a lot easier for me, and also because I've got a number of slides I'm going to walk us through that are a little bit technical in matter, but as Luis was just talking about, one idea is about the aprendizaje invisible and these other areas where we're not making language a barrier. We're not going to make technology a barrier. but we're going to just do what we can to understand each other, support each other using technologies. So I want to thank everybody for joining and for the help in translating the tough parts. If you have any questions, we've got the messages on here. So please make use of that. And if somebody can help just kind of in Castellano, put in the key points that maybe that don't translate, they're not easy to understand, I think that would kind of help out a lot too. And also in the chat, please introduce yourselves, because the idea here is that we're going to make this into a much less formal I mean, I'll present some stuff a little more formally, but my hope is that we could have a much less formal conversation, something that we can speak more from the heart on. So I just want to have this little warning that in case of any lawyers watching me, because I do a lot of work with governments, I do a lot of work with international organizations, and the last thing they want to see in a newspaper is John Moravec said something like this about the future of work and yada yada yada, or education. So these are, I'll present findings from research, which are the findings from research, but the opinions I'm going to have are absolutely mine, and the conversation I want is going to be completely open as well. Especially as we're looking at the future, because there are no correct answers about the future. But I think that as far as I think about things, if we don't invest in the future, we're not going to get anything out of it, right? No, bueno burrado no cabe en un zapato, right? We get what we pay for, and especially when we're making these investments in education. So from my perspective, building awareness of the future is so important to today's youth. It's the best that we can do to prepare them to be successful in a future that's better than what we enjoy today. So I'm going to share an analysis of some global trends in education. Now, this is work that I conducted last summer for the municipality of Prague in the Czech Republic to help them with their strategies for the future. So we are looking at creating some global strategies and then working with communities to make these into actionable plans that they can work with communities. So when I come to the end of this, I'll share 4 scenarios for how these futures may turn out that builds off of these futures. All right. So I know you guys, it sounds like from the introductions that you guys are already familiar with a lot of my work, but this is the framework that I've been working with for the last decade plus, since the whole time I've known Luis. He said 12 years ago at Flaxo. My goodness, that's like been forever. So I've been working with this paradigm, this chart, for at least 12 years. And basically, what I was trying to get at is that we're moving away from this traditional paradigm into something that I was calling more the nomadic paradigm, where our relationships aren't simple, but rather they're becoming much more complex and creative. And I use the word teleologica, to mean that systems are becoming so complex that they're creating their own goals and creating their own outcomes, that things aren't very well managed, or we can't manage them as easily because we're finding much more self-organization. We're working together to build synergies, like what can you and I create that's bigger than any of us, right? Alone. How can we design our futures? And change is happening so fast. And especially, I think when we get to the chat here, we can start talking about things like Chat GPT, which are really creating changes in education, where it's hard to figure out now what's causing what. And this is creating opportunities for creative destruction, which is a postmodernist idea of just destroying an organization and rebuilding it from the ground up. I don't mean destroying like taking bulldozers or dynamite, but rather just organizationally we reconfigure. Because reality is much more based on the context that we have. Everybody's got different problems. We need different solutions. But at the same time, we're also very much globalized, that we're all in this together. And yeah, I think that COVID really tested it, but we found ways around it. Like we're doing many more webinars and much more online experiences as well, right? So this was the framework that I was looking at going into looking at disruptions. And what we did is we engaged in a meta-analysis of recent literature. So by recent literature, we looked at between the 1st of January, publications on Scopus that were published between the 1st of January 2020, so just before the start of the pandemic, and the 5th of June of last year. So because we had to have a cutoff date so we could analyze the data. And working with the keywords of disruptive technology in the education humanities, and just really, these were Scopus indexed articles. We looked at 1,155 articles to really get a sense of the different relationships and to help us identify clusters of trends and ideas, and to also help illuminate patterns in the research that was there. So it wound up being a huge amount of data, right? So we mapped the education and this sort of disruptive technologies research. But really, when we started looking at from the larger view, the literature really formed a bit of a meatball. I should call it a meatball with spikes, right? Where we wound up with 1,837 keywords that really emerged as key in the literature. And among these, it was almost 170,000 connections and interconnections among them. So we plotted these out as nodes, and then we looked at factors such as the frequency of terms and the impact of each. And this helped us to understand the relative strength of each and to identify clusters, but also modualities, which are patterns that emerged within the data and what people are talking about. So there are 5 key trends in disruptive technologies, right? Now, the really interesting thing is that these are the technologies that were published by June 5th of last year. I think there's some technologies missing, and we can talk about those towards the end, right? So we've got 5 global trends. So we got the first is that we've got accelerating technological progression among machine systems. So we've got artificial intelligence, which is the development of computer systems that can perform tasks that humans don't do too well, or we've always done in the past. We've got machine learning, computer systems employing algorithms or statistical analyses to make sense of complex data. And we've got digital transformation in general, which is about adaptation of technologies largely by societies. Okay, I think we talked about that a lot in education, right? We've got the transformations in context and reality. So some cool trends or big trends are augmented reality, and that's projected to be a big trend over this next 2 years. It's by adding the layer of technology, such as smart glasses, to help bring new context to what we see, right? Sensory information. And then we've got virtual reality, which is kind of like next step in augmented reality, and that replaces the real world with something that's completely invented. And then we have the metaverse, which has been a sexy topic lately. It's kind of like the internet of augmented reality and virtual reality and real world experiences all integrated. And also we've got gamification, right? Using games as an approach to change the context of an environment by adding game mechanics. And many social media tools have been using it. Sometimes we find ways to add game mechanics in education. And the third trend, we've got transformations in industrial production. So we've had the so-called Industry 4.0, which is really about using automation, such as artificial intelligence and robotics, and producing additive manufacturing, which is kind of like, which includes 3D printing, for example. So using technologies to manufacture on demand. But we also are finding that cities, by and large, are finding ways to leverage this 4.0 paradigm and try and find ways to use these concepts to help govern communities, right? And create new policies that are largely automated by technologies. So that's really interesting. The fourth trend is that we've got the decentralization of data networks. I think the biggest example of this would be blockchain. And one application would be like, for example, storing education credentials. in an open public network, right? So it creates some sort of permanence. It creates the credentials are held among the community. And then the fifth one we have is mobile information systems, right? Which really provides for the idea of being able to do anything, anytime, anywhere. And we're also building much more of a social reliance on mobile technologies. And I don't think that we need to really elaborate on that much because we've all been using smartphones and these things for a while, right? But we're still talking about this stuff in the literature. So we've got these 4 clusters. I'm going to try to go through these rather quickly because I think these clusters are interesting. But I think that the transversal things among them, which I'll talk about, are a little more interesting. But then I want to get into the scenarios, which I think will help jump our discussion a bit, okay? So the first cluster is all about ecosystems. So we've got a technological ecosystem. We're talking about global infrastructures of connectivity, storage, distribution, supply. We've got political ecosystems. Right? Because we can't have these global disruptive technologies without a long, they can't sustain themselves long term without the development of policies that help connect them with broader global agendas. We've got global learning ecosystems because there's the global nature of information, and I would also caution disinformation as well. We've got systems and technologies. We've got large-scale interactions and flows that require skills according to the natures of the challenges that come up. And these ecosystems are all connected together. They're complex, each on their own, and they're connected together, which is in turn also incredibly complex. So some 4 key points from this first cluster. I just want to make clear that these 4 clusters, all have different colors, and you'll see them come together at the end. So I just watch out for that. With these clusters, I think with this cluster, I think that the challenge is that the environment as an educational strategy. We've got the technological, pedagogical, things are interconnected to global dynamics, and these allow for local educational approaches. So by global, I mean that's global as well as local, right? So it's adding another layer of complexity to how we're looking at ecosystems, but also another layer of opportunity for communities to work within these ecosystems, that we're not isolated as communities, but rather as communities working with more broadly in the world. There's also a challenge of social development because of the complexity of the systems. How do we manage or create educational regulations that are immersed in a social framework? And then really thinking about the impacts of disruptive technologies and how we can adapt from them and towards a much more global model, and also respecting our local models as well. So some big challenges in there. The second cluster is about digital transformations in the education sector. There are 2 big spikes that aren't shown on this chart because the screen format doesn't show them, but we've got blockchain on the top. It's a massive spike that stands out, and we've got practice on the bottom, right? So these are really about technological educational strategies. How do we do such things as creating personal learning environments, gamification? We've got design thinking, cooperative learning. How do we use technologies to manage schools? Like how can we use artificial intelligence to identify patterns in performance? Or how do we use blockchain for records management? How do we use processes for digitalization or using these intelligent data systems to allow strategic improvements? And how do we use these technologies to really engage stakeholders within education systems? So some of these challenges that we have here, it's like really breaking free from digitalization, right? Making things digital, to digital transformation. And how do we transform ourselves, our schools, and our communities through these technologies? How do we adapt or create these agile and systemic thinking disciplines within our educational organizations? And how do we guarantee technological independence and integrity of the education system if we're relying so much on technology? I think especially today, that's a huge question, right? How do we maintain the integrity and independence? The third cluster is really about mindsets. It's how are we looking at things? How are we perceiving things? It's about implications. So it's like, so what if we adopt disruptive technologies, right? So what's really the purpose? If we use these things, what's our pathways for moving forward? And so when we're thinking about purpose, social innovations may be really fueled by the purposive use of these technologies, right? Having a clear understanding of what for these things are going to be used, not just bring technologies into education just because we think we need to have them or everybody else has them, but having a clear purpose in mind for what they're for. And that requires really understanding our mindset and having this sort of metacognitive ability to also understand what we don't know, so we know where to invest. And this requires truly new forms of leadership, just being able to work with dexterity. And I like to say chaotic leadership, which is a balance of chaos and order. It's a term coined by Dee Hock, who used to be the leader at Visa in the 1980s. But I think that's really key there. It's like keeping our organizations just on the edge, kind of like Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, but thinking about it from a leadership perspective. So mindsets impact our organizational culture, the impact our visions, and some of the challenges are that we need the connection of principles, purposes, and innovation in the design of educational institutional models. We need clear identification of ideas behind the innovations that we want. We need new leadership development that's flexible, that's able to work with chaotic organizations, able to work with disruption and provide disruptive leadership too. And we need to develop organizational cultures more broadly within education that's more compatible with the digital age. All right, so this is the fourth cluster, and it's all about structure for changes, right? So some basic stuff sometimes. It's like, let's make sure we've got the right people with the right resources in place for change, while keeping with the realities of the educational paradigm in check. How do we support in the development of soft skills, creative people, critical, systematic thinkers, ethical, pragmatic, building cultures of innovation and leadership within complex environments? How do we build resiliency for future disruptions? And how do we really create some policy making that guarantees that things are ethical, that we're secure in what we do, and that relationships are sustainable among the various stakeholders and different actors in the communities that we serve and support? And how do we provide for greater mobility in education, right? So if we're all using smartphones, we've got Chromebooks or other devices, or have access to these things, how do we provide students then with greater freedom to determine for themselves how they learn, when they learn, if they learn? And then there's a whole question of education and industry 4.0, right? Because the education system itself cannot be isolated from greater social, economic, or technological changes, right? We have to think about how education plays along with these greater changes, these massive industrial work and social changes that are happening as well. So we've got some challenges, right? We need to think about the development of lifelong and life-relevant digital skills. We need to really focus on the development of new educational policies within a framework of sustainability, within ethics, within security. We need to connect with emerging technologies and the broader industrial fourth revolution. And we need to build resiliency through leadership, cyber leadership, and adaptability to these changes, if not leading the changes themselves. Now, there are a number of transversal aspects, right? And these are the lines, the dots, that the points, that the themes that connect between the various groups. And I think that these transversal aspects really define the vulnerabilities of societies of the future, where the education sector has an important role, both from teaching level, but also the governmental level and the development of policy, because these things should all be geared at reducing vulnerabilities in the digital age. So some transversal aspects that came across strongly in the literature: ethics, right? How can artificial intelligence and new logic associated with these technologies be used ethically? We got sustainability, we got resource management, we got conservation, we got development, the use of technologies for environmental, social well-being, personal well-being. How do we build resilience and adaptation, right? There are so many disruptive events happening now and also in the near future. These are wild cards, really, that so many of them we can't predict what's going to happen next. And the pace of these changes is accelerating. And the pace of these emergence of these unknowns in our lives and society is increasing. And so we have to have the tool sets and the mindsets to remain adaptable and relevant in a world consumed by this accelerating technological and social change. The fourth, security. We've got cybersecurity and resiliency. So we've got data protection, risk mitigation, technological sovereignty. What's going to happen when a kid's fourth grade math scores are stolen by hackers and they're out in the market, and the kid gets denied a job as an adult, saying, sorry, we saw you failed that math test. We can't hire you. I mean, how do we provide this, some of these basic securities, in addition to some of the more serious and criminal forms that we see out there? And then we've got law and policy. They're simply struggling to catch up. That how do we create these frameworks of rights and responsibilities for the protection of children and adolescents, right? How do we ensure digital well-being? How do we cure violence prevention, right? How do we ensure privacy for everybody? And how do we protect everybody's data? So that's what we really pulled out of the study. But you're probably wondering, right? That's what the data says. What's my opinion, right? And in my opinion, after looking at those 1,200 articles, none of this is new. We know all of this. Those of us working in education, those of us working in various fields, we know all this. We know about all these changes. But in education management, education policy creation, this is all science fiction. And I think that presents a huge challenge for us, because we're only seeing more and more disruptive technologies. So the challenge is, how do we connect the changes that are happening in the world with meaningful policies, especially in education, right? So I'm going to share 4 scenarios for how this could go. And you can start thinking at local levels, national levels, right? But these are scenarios for education in a disrupted world. The first scenario is perder el bote, miss that boat. And it's just basically that failing to adopt change creates a risk that schools 1.0 cannot educate kids to be relevant in society 4.0, or by the time they graduate, 5.0, 6.0, 7.0, right? They'll find fewer and fewer and fewer opportunities to connect with students, to be meaningful, fewer opportunities to connect with communities, fewer opportunities to connect with stakeholders, and eventually come to a point where it's impossible to adopt or adapt to new technological realities. Now, the second one is arriving late, right? And I think this is where I see many schools now, or many school systems. And it's just that without effective policies to guide efforts, leadership around adapting, adopting, or leading school transformation in an era dominated by change is absent. So schools are always stuck in a position where they're watching the world change around them and scrambling to try to catch up, right? Maybe hesitant to participate themselves because they don't have the resources. Maybe hesitant to participate themselves because it's not part of the national curriculum. Maybe hesitate to participate by themselves because they think that they're alone. And the third one, justo a tiempo, right? Just on time. And that requires some proaction on the part of the schools to find ways to participate and set policies that enable engagement with various sectors of society, especially technological innovators. So one big thing is that schools are oftentimes consumers, right? They consume content. Like people are creating online digital content, assuming that schools will love that stuff and they consume it. But it doesn't really change that much. Schools need to be much more participative. Teachers need to be much more participative and become creators as well. They're creating contents and that are much more meaningful. So we have outputs, graduates that are generally well prepared to participate in a technologically advanced society and also in their own communities as well. And then we got the fourth one, which is my favorite, of course, being a futurist, arriving early, arribo temprano. And this isn't about being proactive. This is about being preactive. And I don't know if proactivo es una palabra en español, but preactive school systems engage in the purposive development of the digital transformation that they serve. That means that they understand very specifically for what we are educating, for what we're using different technologies, for what we are trying to do stuff, right? And having that mindset really enables them to take an anticipatory approach, right? So identifying and leading with new disruptive technologies, maybe even engaging in the development of new disruptions as well, and becoming real players engaged in a broader socioeconomic ecosystem. So, I mean, I wouldn't be talking here if I wasn't going to talk about the perfil profesional, right? For the future, right? And if you know me any bit, I always say that the profile is very much nomadic. And how do we survive in this nomadic world, right? So when attending with schools and attending to these changes, you know, you ask, so what now, right? So what do schools really need to do? What do school systems need to do? And that is they need to facilitate creativity, right? Because our relationships are just so much more complex now. We have to have creative solutions. We have to empower all stakeholders because hierarchies aren't working out so well. We need to build relationships. We need to enable serendipities, right? What can you and I create that's bigger than any of us? We have to get into these situations, these contexts where we meet each other, get to know each other so that we can enable this stuff. We need to enable design. We have to be able to adapt, react, and pre-act. We need to become much more agile and as institutions capable of reinventing ourselves because the world is changing so fast. If we can't do that, we're way obsolete. We have to create new applications for these new contexts that are emerging within the world and changing approaches to reality. And because the world is globalized, we can't stand apart from that. Rather, we need to engage the world. So I talk quite a bit about the development of the nomad profile for students. And nomads are just simply creative, imaginative, innovative people who can work almost anytime, anywhere, with anybody. And they work with their individual knowledge, right? We've got tacit knowledge and their explicit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is what we learn by doing, and explicit knowledge is what we get off of the internet or reading books or oftentimes in the classroom. But we combine these things together. We become very unique people with different skills and opportunities in how we use things. Nomads leverage their personal knowledge and they serve as connectors within organizations. And I like to use the analogy of spaghetti and meatballs because I'm having spaghetti tonight. So I'm really thinking about spaghetti. But think about, organizations are messy things. They're messy. They're complex these days. They're not very neatly highly organized pyramids of responsibilities. No, they're messes. They're spaghetti. But nomads are like the meatballs, right? They connect the different strands together and provide meaning within an organization or between organizations or outside of organizations. So I think many nomads are kind of working in the gig economy or as consultants, but you can also find nomads within traditional organizations as well. They're just leveraging their personal knowledge to create value. And so that's why I like to really point out that many people are already nomadic. Some people don't quite realize it, and others maybe not by election, that they're having to engage in the gig economy. Now we get into, so what is this about, right? So I think that key to nomad development is personal development, right? And it's asking ourselves the question, so what do I want to bring into the world, right? And as educators, how can we support students to bring something beautiful into the world and make it real? Nomads are future looking, oriented towards the future. They're prepared for accelerating technological change. And many economic uncertainties that go along with it. And they're really focused on the skills that encourage mobility, being able to do anytime, anywhere, and just really how do you contextualize what you know to solve problems. So I think that the key questions then for educators is, so how do we provide for more agency and self-efficacy, auto-efficacia? And by agency, I don't mean like a travel agency or something like that, but I mean agency is just being allowed to do what you want to do. And how do we provide for that with students? And then self-efficacy is believing in ourselves to get these things done. I think in so many education systems, the amount of agency we place on students and teachers is incredibly low. Everything is super controlled. But I think varies by culture. Sometimes students find ways to learn despite their education, and self-efficacy really emerges. And so I think it's interesting seeing people to really blossom nomadically from there. But for me, the point of nirvana is we have this apex connection of high agency and self-efficacy. So going from kind of like the key ideas from I shared Nomad Society, just recapping on nomads and the nomad profile in education. Nomads could be anybody at any age. They prosper in flat networks. They don't operate terribly well in hierarchies because they want to share. They're constantly learning and unlearning, right? They use new technologies voluntarily. They're contextualizing what they know. They're learning continuously, utilizing their tacit and explicit knowledge, always looking for new collaborations, always trying to share what they know. And I think that most importantly, though, they're not afraid of failure, because failing is one of the best ways that we learn. But the key for educators is not to let students become failures, right? We have to support each other. We have to help each other pick up and learn when we fail, but let's not become failures. So I think I want to leave that to open the conversation here. It looks like Luis lost his connection. He'll be back. No, he's back. Okay. But I just want to ask a question with you guys. Yorake. And also, you guys are also welcome to contact me after on. So there's my contact card. So you got my email address and my WhatsApp number. So if you got any questions or anything that comes up after this, able to talk to. So I just want to be able to be present and able to share. That's
Okay,
it.
excellent. Thank you very much, John. I, I want to propose just some remarks I want to share with you all, and open to questions from the audience. I think that this is the more important. If you don't mind, I will switch to Spanish, and if you don't understand the Spanish, I will switch again to English. Okay?
Entiendo todo. No hay problema.
Perfecto. Bueno, a mí siempre los temas tecnológicos, por mi formación de sociólogo, me llevan a temas profundos en relación, tú hablas mucho del tema de la ley y las políticas que deben de haber en cada país, y pero por ejemplo, yo nunca he encontrado una solución que ante temas de disrupción tecnológica pueda acercar el tema a la pobreza, ¿sí? Yo veo que la pobreza es una materia que más bien se ahonda con las nuevas tecnologías. O sea, ¿por qué? Porque no tienen acceso los grandes sectores a la tecnología y por lo tanto su pobreza se va haciendo más lacerante, más dura. Entonces, siempre yo creo que es algo que no tenemos claro y que los gobiernos tampoco, porque probablemente no les interesa demasiado. Yo pienso que cuando hablamos de disrupción, tenemos que hablar de disrupción en términos de qué tipo de educación estamos hablando. En el ámbito de la educación formal, la disrupción es vista más como una amenaza. Hay un artículo que compartió hace poco Cristóbal Cobo sobre un estudio que se hace en Estados Unidos en escuelas que están bajo el esquema STEAM, y que tienen modelos activos de educación, y en donde los estudiantes tienen la percepción de que aprenden menos, ¿sí?, que con el sistema tradicional, aunque la evidencia arroja que no, que están aprendiendo más. Pero esa es razón suficiente para que los maestros están regresándose a un modelo tradicional, ¿sí? Porque quieran quedar bien con la escuela, porque es más fácil ser maestro tradicional. O sea, no hay nada mejor que dictar y hacer un examen sobre lo dictado, ¿sí? Entonces, lo otro cuesta trabajo. Entonces, son las que yo creo que en la escuela formal está pasando a aceite, y que además se viene una avalancha de la que estuvimos platicando John y yo antes de que comenzara, que es todo este tema de la inteligencia artificial, el ChatGPT, del cual tengo bien poco yo de conocer el ChatGPT. Yo estoy metido en temas de machine learning por herramientas que distribuimos desde Draft, pero esta parte del machine learning, de tú hacer las preguntas adecuadas a un bot y que él te resuelva te ponga una redacción, que ya no sea importante aprender a escribir, porque te lo hace una máquina, son cambios fundamentales y a los que probablemente la escuela no está preparada, pero también la tecnología no le está pidiendo permiso. Un ejemplo que yo veo es el escándalo que tenemos en México ahorita con la ministra de la Suprema Corte y la falsificación de la tesis, y hace un par de años con hace un par de años, no, unos 5 o 6 años, con el expresidente Peña Nieto, el mismo problema. Entonces ya vimos que a la gente le encanta hacer fraude con las tesis. El tema es que ahora con un bot te puede llegar algo que no entienda el maestro como un fraude y que pase tan tranquilo. Pero no necesariamente es una mala noticia. El tema es que esto viene a hacer un cambio como una avalancha que va a generar muchos cambios, y la educación formal no está preparada para eso. Entonces, con todo en mente, es decir, hacia dónde va la disrupción, ¿sí? Eso es como que lo que a mí me gustaría, terminar pensando yo que el mundo es disruptivo, el cambio está afuera, pero la escuela no, la escuela formal, los ambientes extraescolares menos. Entonces, bueno, estos eran algunas comentarios que quería yo hacer, y sí me gustaría abrir a las preguntas que quieran ustedes hacer a John, y pues abrir boca, ¿sí? Entonces, alguien que quiera participar, hacer un comentario, hacer una pregunta, pues serán bienvenidos. No sean tímidos. Jimena, chao.
Gracias, Luis. Hola a todas, hola a todos. ¿Qué tal? Hi, John. I cannot start my camera. I'm sorry. I tried. It doesn't work. It's not cooperating. So
Technology.
yeah. So I have this question after all you said and after Luis' comment right now. So in an age of machine learning and machine use for learning and providing solutions like the chat GDP and all of the sort, what in your view would be those human capacities that are paramount now in these times? Because we talk a lot about machines and how they work and which we should be embedding in our education, but what about human capacities? I mean, where do humans stand now and in the next 30 years facing the rapid and exponential development of these technologies?
Yeah.
Is there any room left for humans?
It's a really challenging question because when we finished our study, we presented it, I think around September 13th or 15th of last year. And that was before these AI bots started really emerging. And what they're doing with very crude, rudimentary data sets is amazing. So I asked Stable Diffusion, which is an AI program that's designed to just create pictures. I asked it to create a picture of an artificial intelligence creating an artificial intelligence, right? Trying to do something kind of recursive. And I said, make it a drawing. And really the stuff that these things is producing is just really stunning, what we're getting out of there. And this is out of a crude data set, right? So in our study, we're looking at the academic literature. None of this stuff was on the horizon for the people that were writing this stuff. And now we're thrust into the world of AI-generated art. I've been having some very interesting conversations with Chat GPT, which has a very crude, small data set for what we're going to have, what's going to come out like maybe next month, which is going to be the basis of what creates its basis of knowledge with is going to be at least 1,000 times greater, right? Right now, I came to the conclusion that Chat GPT is able to produce cogent arguments, and it always produces a response. It presents things as if it is the correct response. Even if it's giving us bullshit, it still creates a response. And it sounds like an authoritative college professor who just knows nothing about his field, which is kind of scary because I think more and more we are going to rely on these things. But the sense of quality, or we getting the answers that we need or the solutions that we need, is going to be questionable. Now, obviously, as these data sets improve, these machines are going to be really good at answering things and solving problems, maybe even really good at managing us. So the big questions So obviously the education world is really awash with, well, so what do we do now? How do we keep this out of our classrooms? We're turning into a management question rather than, so how can we prepare kids for jobs where this is what we're going to use anyways? There's already talk of Siri, the Google Assistant, Amazon's Assistant, all these things tap into Chat GPT. Cortana, Google releasing its AI stuff. So we're going to be tightly integrated using these tools anyways. And so we have to start thinking about, so what can humans do that machines cannot do, and really attend and tune our training for that. And also look towards a future where artificial intelligence is going to just take away so many of these jobs. So what are we going to do in the future for jobs as well? So you mentioned Cristobal. So Cristobal and I, as you read, I'm sure you've read it in Aprendizaje Invisible, and also elaborate more in Nomad Society, and some other things that we strongly felt. This was a decade ago, that attending to soft skills development, sort of that what makes us the best humans that we can be, character development, being a good person, having an entrepreneurial mindset, understanding how to navigate through computational problems, maybe not understanding the math completely, but understanding the pathways for it. So if we can't compete with machines, maybe we can find ways to create new jobs, new opportunities, or to be able to use these AI tools and other tools that would emerge too in ways that are beneficial. Because I think that right now there's a huge opportunity for people who know how to have meaningful conversations to get the right answers and the right responses from these AI bots. So, yeah, but change is accelerating, and pretty soon these changes are going to take on a pace where we just simply cannot imagine what's going to happen next. And for me, I'm deeply concerned about the social aspects of when that happens.
I think this is the perfect example of when we thought we had all the answers, they changed the questions. So I think ChatGPT and these kind of bots and machine learning, artificial intelligence are going to change the game. The thing is how they will change the game and how prepared we are, and especially the school systems, how prepared are for this avalanche of new ways of thinking. Patricia.
Gracias, Luis. I don't know if my camera is working, John. Sorry about that, but because I have very unstable internet. And thanks, Ximena, for that question. And so what I want to say is more a reflection, and I want to pick your brain on that, because I think that I've been implementing education policies in Mexico for a while, and I think that there's a tension because this conversation about the future of education and how, the future of technologies or the present of technologies are very far away from the conversation of the teachers. So I think they are very afraid of talking about that. They don't know how to incorporate the conversation in their daily work with the students and the parents. So maybe I want to kind of reflect on, and this conversation is a conversation that I've been having with Cristobal for many years. He's a very good friend of mine. So how do we solve the tension between this very complex conversation and take it very, very down to the conversation of the teachers? So I don't know if it's a matter of a narrative, if it's a matter of our mistake of not taking the proper language to the teachers. But I am convinced, John, that as we can think about how much education should change, but as long as we don't have on board the teachers, nothing's going to change in the set of the classroom or even the schools. So I don't know. I know that there's not like one answer, but maybe just pick your brain on that, because I think there's a big gap and we haven't yet been able to talk to the teachers in an easy way in how this is going to impact the classrooms and whatever, independently the education level or the socioeconomic level of the parents and the students and the society. So yeah, so that's kind of my question, reflection, and attention that I have been overseeing for many years.
Yeah. So, hi, Patty. So we never got a chance to meet, though, because I was in Puebla a few times, and so never got a chance to meet, but around Zamora and Zacatecas de la Manzanas and stuff, I just really enjoyed meeting various school leaders there. I think that we're working with teachers and we're working with educators, but also when we're working with ministries of education, we have to stop managing the problem. We have to stop looking at it as a management question. We have to stop looking at it as a control question. Teachers look at it like they're being put down, which may be happening in some places. I think ministers, are faced with the real conundrum because you have to show progress. You have to show that you're using funds responsibly, etc. And there's nothing more political than education itself. But at the same time, we do need a new narrative, and we need, I would say, very strong national leadership in placing trust in educators and the education system and everybody working to create stuff, because at this point, we're at a point where we have to reinvent everything. I'm going to share a quote that I ran into. It was something on another project I'm working on, and somebody brought it up. It isn't related, but it haunts me. This just really haunts me. I'm not a huge fan of Nietzsche. I'm not a huge fan of Nietzsche, but this quote just really struck me because I think it really relates to this conversation. So Nietzsche is talking about Pandora's box, right? The legend, Pandora, the box contained all the evils in the world, but knowledge and all that stuff. And once you open Pandora's box, well, it's everything's unleashed. But Nietzsche's take on the story is that the real evil was that with the opening of Pandora's box came the hope that things would get better or things could be fixed, and that hope was the real evil because it only prolonged our torment. And that is, it's just a haunting idea, and I'm afraid that in this case, I think Nietzsche's right. That we shouldn't prolong our torment, but rather, if we can't be bold and create change now, we're only making things worse.
Yo pensaría, John, que es una paradoja, porque por un lado la esperanza es, perdón que al switch al español, la esperanza es tormentosa, pero también logra resultados. O sea, también hemos avanzado. Por ejemplo, en México, un resultado de la Revolución Mexicana es que todos los niños en este país aprenden a leer y a escribir, y el estudiar la educación básica se convirtió en algo que está asumido por el mexicano, ¿sí? Eso es un logro. Claro, no, con eso nos salimos del problema, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que, y esa es opinión, el problema con la disrupción está en el sistema educativo, en el sistema formal. Ahí es donde tenemos el problema, porque la escuela es una institución del Estado, y entonces el Estado manipula la educación para lograr sus fines, como una institución. Entonces, muchas veces, este tipo de educación tecnológica disruptiva es vista como una amenaza, ¿sí? Por la autoridad, porque muchas veces siempre le echamos la culpa de todo al maestro, y la verdad es que muchas veces es la institución el problema. Y hablo de educación privada y pública, ¿sí? O sea, no siempre es el maestro el problema es la autoridad. Por ejemplo, para mí un gran ejemplo es el TDA. Yo, es mi opinión también, pienso que el TDA fue la manera en que se pusieron de acuerdo los maestros, la institución para echarle la culpa al niño, ¿sí? You know, in English is the disorder of...
ADD or ADHD.
¿Cuál era?
ADD or ADHD, it's the same thing, actually.
Yeah, y con eso en mente, el problema entonces es que la culpa es del niño, y a mí me parece algo perverso, es muy malo para la educación, pero ahí es donde vemos que es una institución del Estado, con toda la autoridad del Estado, y de eso no se salva ningún país. Entonces, creo yo, el problema ahorita es que creo que con la emergencia de el ChatGPT, todo este tipo de inteligencia artificial, no pasa por la escuela, no pasa por la autorización de ninguna autoridad, lo va a usar el ciudadano, y ahí es donde está en problemas, se en problema la autoridad escolar. Pero en los espacios extraescolares, en los espacios, ahí sí la disrupción funciona. Yo he estado toda mi vida en el movimiento Scout, de hecho hay algunos amigos míos que están en el movimiento Scout, que están en esta llamada, y muchas de las cosas que fueron disruptivas hace 100 años, nacieron en los Scouts, ¿sí? Ahorita probablemente nazcan en otros movimientos. Con Marlene estuvimos en el Computer Clubhouse, un modelo del Media Lab del MIT, y era totalmente disruptivo. Yo creo que fue el primer makerspace que yo conocí en mi vida. Estoy hablando del año 2000. Entonces, yo creo que por ahí están las claves de que probablemente va a seguir nuestra esperanza por el lado de las escuelas extraescolarizadas, etcétera. Marlene.
I'm going to speak in both languages. Quería comentar esto del Clubhouse, que la experiencia que tuvimos en México, la verdad fue, yo lo pienso como que por allí va el camino, ¿no? Vimos que cuando se alía el gobierno con una empresa, con organizaciones civiles, se pueden lograr grandes cosas. Y este es un gran ejemplo de lo que pasó en Clubhouse, donde los niños hacían esto, they allowed to do what they want to do. Entonces, es súper importante, pues, crear estos tipos de espacios. Esto lo añado también a pensar en la democratización de la tecnología, que por allí lo empezó a tocar Luis, ¿no? Esta cuestión de la pobreza que tenemos en México, pero ¿cómo la democratizamos? Solo a través de proyectos disruptivos, como un ejemplo de Clubhouse o ese tipo de espacios alternativos que podrían pues ayudar, ¿no? a esto porque yo estaba pensando, imaginemos, por ejemplo, este chat GTP que ahorita está de moda, tú puedes pagar para tener acceso a hacer textos, hacer cosas de diseño, pero si no tienes el recurso, pues jamás vas a tener acceso a ello, ¿no? Entonces volvemos a hacer estas diferencias tan grandes de riqueza, ¿no? O sea, los que son más ricos van a poder tener acceso a la tecnología artificial, los demás no. Bueno, por ahí va mi comentario.
Tenemos espacio para un par de preguntas más, porque para variar en nuestros webinars de draft ya nos pasamos de la hora, pero pues Mercedes, una pregunta, y si alguien más quiere participar, levante su mano. Mercedes, adelante. Y Alejandra.
Gracias. Hola, ¿cómo están? A mí la cuestión de... I'm sorry, I'm going to switch to English in just a little bit, but la cuestión de pensar caminos paralelos en la educación me perturbó un poco. Yo soy de Argentina y en Argentina se ve muy marcada, muy dolorosa la diferencia, yo te diría en 3 ejes: privado, público y las alternativas, como decían, ¿sí? Las escuelas Waldorf y todo ese tipo de cuestiones de movimientos nuevos que apuntan a una educación más libre, a una educación más creativa, más parecida a los ejes que estaba exponiendo John. Y me pregunto si quizás no tenemos un eje transversal, ¿no? Entonces aquí me gustaría conocer la opinión de John respecto a la educación democrática. John, what do you think about this maybe fourth or transversal axis between all these kind of things? Because maybe we're missing the point here. It's not different kind of ways. What do you think?
Okay. My cat came, so this is Frank. He likes to join these meetings now.
He's beautiful.
You know, I think this connects to what Marlena was saying and also Luis. Marlena was talking about power and allowing teachers teach, students to learn, and Luis, I think, was connecting on more of the informal and the non-formal spaces. And democratic education, it really baffles me. It really baffles me, and that's probably because I came out of a formal industrial style education myself, and but I'm seeing kids work with it, especially those who normally don't fit in quite precisely, the ADHD kids or others, because it gives them the space to learn what they want to learn when they want to learn. And an opportunity to visit a few Sudbury type schools, and they're absolutely baffling, because I'm seeing kids do things like learn English really well by having their own control and leadership over what they do, and also skills building. And the Sudbury schools I visited, the kids, if they want to go on to college, they're by and large they're getting into the first college of their choice, despite not being told what to learn. But they take on the skills, leadership skills, working together. And so a lot of these soft skills development that we've been talking about, they've really been building that stuff in. And so I think it'd be really, really, really interesting if we talk about what the state does, and looking, and especially from a controls perspective, but to run parallel experiments with different types of schools, some of them democratic and others. And the real challenge, and this is a challenge for teachers, it's a challenge for parents, it's a challenge for ministries, is they have to start placing trust in each other and within the system, and especially on kids to learn. Because if we're looking at futures that we can't control learning at all. And these things go hand in hand, but we can attend to it. I think that from a government standpoint, and what we do with our communities, we need to focus more on what we can control. And some of it's just making sure that every kid's got access to a toilet, right, that works all the time, right? Or some of these other aspects, having adequate social supports. But in education, I think that we really should invest in running these experiments into seeing what happens if we try these different approaches or provide an ecology of options around that. Because right now what we have is that we have educational gaps and educational divides where the different, in reality, from a pedagogical standpoint, the different, especially in primary years, the difference between public schools and private schools isn't that much, except that we're dividing kids socioeconomically. And so it's the socioeconomic factors that come in for success more than the pedagogical ones. So I think that I just think that we've got real opportunities to really disrupt things by trying these other models. And as you say, democratic education, I think, is one of those that deserves some serious attention.
Gracias, John. Alejandra, querías hacer una pregunta o comentario.
Sí. Bueno, un comentario primero. Un poco, de hecho, hablando de lo que decía Ximena, sobre los soft skills que tenemos que estar formando los alumnos, y un poco combinado con lo que decías, Luis, de estas realidades de la educación, por ejemplo, pública, la educación particular, cómo se van creando estos gaps entre uno y otro y sus realidades en el acercamiento con la tecnología, ¿no? Pero me acuerdo que vi con Cristi Alamurka, no sé si se acuerdan, o Dolores Rake, que habla mucho de estas habilidades que tienen que tener las competencias que deben de tener en cuanto al uso de la tecnología. Y creo que, por ejemplo, en ese sentido, independientemente si estás con recursos tecnológicos fuertes o no, creo que esas habilidades se pueden ir desarrollando, ¿no? O sea, esta parte de la comunicación, la colaboración, la actitud intercultural, la actitud crítica para poder saber que todo lo que leemos no necesariamente es real. O sea, son habilidades que creo que es importante que no perdamos de vista, como por ejemplo, en la parte de la formación docente, que al menos a mí me toca, hablar a los maestros y decirles, te voy a mandar a una escuela pública donde no tienen ni luz, ¿no? Pero como quiera puedes preparar a los chicos para la parte de enfrentarse a tecnologías en el momento en que tú desarrolles este tipo de habilidades, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, un poco ese comentario y hablar de la caja de Pandora, yo estaba pensando mejor en la caja de Schrödinger, ¿no? O sea, hasta que no abramos vamos a ver realmente qué va a pasar y aún así, quién sabe, todo el tiempo está cambiando. Entonces, no perdamos la esperanza de que la esperanza pueda también ser buena. Entonces, hay que abrir esa caja. Entonces, cambiémosla por Schrödinger. Bueno, mi pregunta a John es más hacia la parte de la formación docente. ¿Cómo debería estar, o sea, cuáles son tus proyecciones o tus ideas con respecto a la formación docente, pero pensando en la formación docente pública? O sea, es decir, estos maestros que se están enfrentando a una realidad donde no hay luz, donde se te puede caer el techo mañana, donde X, pero tengo que preparar alumnos que sean relevantes cuando salgan de esta formación, ¿no? Es decir, tengo que preparar not just in case, es just in time, ¿no? Entonces, esta parte no sé, como que cuáles serían como tus tips ante un escenario con pocos recursos, pero que aún así pudiera ser efectivo en términos de formación docente.
Okay. So my 2 cents. I mean, we need to start by recognizing the harsh reality that we have a recruiting problem within education, and because if we're going to call education one of the foundational cornerstones of society, we have to start treating it that way, and that also starts with teacher recruitment and making sure that teaching profession. I mean, it's a highly respected job, but people need to be paid well, be treated as professionals. It can't be a job that you inherit anymore, right? So that practice absolutely has to stop, right? But with teacher development, you know, I'm finding out more and more that teaching is more of a learning by doing kind of profession. That so many schools of education are doing a really bad job. I'm talking about everywhere around the world actually teaching teachers. They could talk about the theory of teaching, but it actually gets into practice and stuff where we're not doing such a great job. So professional development becomes much more important, and continuous professional development. And I think that we need to treat teachers like we treat doctors, and that doctors, at least over here, are considered as faculty with a university or a teaching hospital or something. So they always have this collegial relationship and continuous learning opportunities. So I think that's something that we can bring in, building these learning communities. And on the other side, since we're talking about disruptive technologies here, I'd be amiss to not point out that there are huge opportunities for developing technologies for teachers. There is a huge problem, I would argue, in the education technology ecosystem that treats every one of us on this call as a consumer, but not as a co-creator or a prosumer or anything. And I think that there's some real opportunities to really engage with teachers in developing tools and technologies that are meaningful for all of us in the profession. And I think that requires a radical rethink of how we develop these things. Because I don't know about you guys, but for me, going through the pandemic, where everybody's suddenly forced to use Moodle, I think we learned what using tools that aren't created by teachers for teachers are like, right? And this is a huge opportunity that we need to latch into, because that would also help facilitate professional development. That also help us get these learning communities going as well.
Muy bien, a mí me gusta mucho la comparación que hace Alejandra hablando del gato de Schrödinger, porque retomando el comentario de la esperanza que hace John, pues también hay que ver cómo suceden las cosas. Ese es el tema de estar en el pico de los cambios, de los eventos que se suceden, pero ciertamente estamos ahorita al borde de cambios muy grandes, cambios que van a afectar el modo en que operamos. Ya, yo creo que el problema es que hemos normalizado el cambio, entonces ya no nos asusta. Todo el tiempo llega algo nuevo y ya el iPhone 14 ya no nos supo a nada porque ya no tiene nada que ofrecer. Entonces todo el tiempo queremos algo totalmente innovador, pero probablemente yo creo que este anuncio de las nuevas tecnologías realmente son disruptivas. Realmente van a provocar cambios y vamos a ser actores que veamos esto, pero siempre con la esperanza de que puedan llegar a todos los niños, a todas las niñas en este planeta y no se queden en una parte de la pirámide, que es algo de lo que he estado yo comentando y algunos de ustedes. Bien, les agradezco mucho habernos acompañado. Yo creo, queda mucha tinta en el tintero. Yo creo que hay muchas cosas. A mí me gustaría invitar otra vez a John para hablar de algún otro tema relacionado con esto, que sigamos conversando. Les comento que el siguiente webinar lo vamos a tener con una organización, una plataforma que trabaja programación para niños, una plataforma israelí que se llama Code Monkey, que va desde niños de preescolar hasta programación para estudiantes de prepa. Y esa es una presentación de qué trata esto, y ya les estaremos avisando por los canales de Draft. Por lo pronto, John, thank you very much, John, for accepting being with us, and I would like to have you many more times, and thank you very much for everything you do.
No, gracias a ustedes.
Ok, bueno, bueno, ya saben, intégrense al canal de YouTube de Draft Consultores o en LinkedIn, ahí encuentran la página, estamos a la orden y pues tenemos muchas inquietudes. La idea es que estas discusiones siempre son inacabadas, entonces tenemos que seguir discutiéndolas, en especial adaptándolas a nuestras realidades. Muchas gracias y que tengan una buena tarde.
Buenas tardes.
Y yo
Hasta luego.
voy quitando el...
Hasta luego, gracias. Bye.